this interview is to find out what success means to you, and also to sort of get your advice for other people, particularly young people, because obviously, like the Warren SOUNDSPHERE has a concentration on kind of trying to motivate young people from around the country, particularly young people in universities and colleges and stuff. So, you've been at the helm of the Warren for a long time, managing lots of really talented people, but you've also got a background in media, journalism, and you've done years and years of that. So I guess the first question for today's interview is, how do you define success? What does it mean to you as a person?
Well, I think for me, it's probably changed over the years. And I think that the first thing people should recognize is that the definition of success doesn't have to be set in stone. It's a moving feast, depending on one's experiences, depending on where you end up, depending who you end up with, if with anybody at all. It's an endless list of variables that could influence what you might define as success. So I suppose the first thing about success is to probably almost, if you do want to define it, don't set that in stone. And I think my definition of success from the time I've been at the Warren and working in this sector, I've been at the Warren for 6 years and I've been in this sector for 10. I think, well, prior to that, my definition of success would probably have been defined almost entirely by how happy my kids were.
Right.
And, whether or not they felt secure and confident and supported. And now that might sound like a bit of a lightweight answer, but when you consider that to be in a position to provide that, I think essentially one has to be fulfilled. One has to have a degree, a sense of fulfillment. And I think that's probably, now that I've been at the Warren for 6 years, I think, speaking as somebody who works for an organization that is about giving young people a voice and letting them lead on things, the first thing I would do is not try and define it for them. So for an organizationally speaking, I think the Warren's definition of success is whether or not it has created the space for young people to feel fulfilled, whether that be in the creative sense, the educational sense, the mental health sense, general well-being sense, skills sense, and also in the sense of having a sense of hope and optimism for the future, which is a very critically important thing. So I think I would feel fulfilled. My definition of success would be having a sense of fulfillment that young people in turn have felt sufficiently empowered to enhance or embark on a pathway or explore something creative that gives them in turn a sense of fulfillment, because it's a domino effect. You tip over one and it leads to another. And once people can feel fulfilled about the smallest thing. For some people who are struggling, it could simply be getting up in the morning, making a cup of tea. There's a sense of fulfillment in that. For others, it's entering an Ironman challenge and being one of those crazy people, and I mean that with love, but who jump into freezing lakes and then climb onto bicycles and climb up half a mountain for no obvious reward other than a sense of fulfillment. But although they are very different people to me, they will get that. We have that commonality around the sense of fulfillment, and I think that's an incredibly important human thing that is often difficult to measure. And there's whenever you talk about fulfillment, people try and say, well, you mean happiness, don't you? And not necessarily, because I think one leads to the other. Persistent sense of fulfillment does lead to happiness, whether it be fleeting or long term, or happiness is fleeting. We can't be happy all the time, otherwise that means we're on addicted to prescribed opioids probably, but I think it's happiness is a different thing, and then you get people will say, well, you can't measure happiness, and no, you can't, But what you can measure is the pursuit of happiness, because the pursuit of
Mm.
happiness is actually a very logical, well, it can be a very logical, with support, a logical step-by-step process. You know, you can help somebody map out a plan. You can help them, explore what they're interested in. All of the things we do at the Warren. We've had young people come to us who, to take very simple examples, they don't speak. They are, what would have been described in the bad old days as an elective, I think it's an elective or selective mute, where the world has become too much and they've simply shut down, and communication is kept either to a bare minimum or not at all. And, that's to have young people at the Warren who have come to us in that space and feeling that way, and then go on to become spoken word performers of note, then that's got to be fulfillment. And once you have that sort of fulfillment, they want it again, and it becomes almost the phrase "I crave fulfillment," is itself a standalone expression. And I think that's, if they get the chance to do that, certainly at least once, but hopefully, periodically, because it's not possible, obviously, more advanced years like mine would certainly demonstrate to me that it's almost damaging to think that one can be, constantly fulfilled. So yeah, I think the true definition of success is a sense of fulfillment, professionally, personally, and for others.
Absolutely. That's a really succinct answer, totally. And before we go on to talk about a bit more about your own thoughts on that, in terms of the Warren, but also your career, can you tell me about some of your greatest successes, things that you will remember for the rest of your life, and things that perhaps even help you get out of bed in the morning, like you mentioned, things that really drive you to keep going and stay motivated, because you are in quite a high pressure environment?
Yeah, I think the things that keep me motivated are in any given, even within the same minute, sometimes I can see a young person doing really well, who I've known for some time, who have progressed along a path, and in the same instant as I walk away from them, or they walk away from me as we might pass in a corridor, I'll encounter another young person who's just walked in the building, who could be demonstrating very similar sense of disenchantment and disillusionment that the first person originally expressed. And I think that's that's something that certainly keeps me motivated, because the job's never done. If we were a business, our business plan would be to be out of business, because there's no need for us anymore. But there are a number of different things. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've encountered some very kind people over the years as a young man consumed with rage and outrage and a sense of injustice that I struggled to channel in a peaceful way. I was somebody who would go on demonstrations and didn't think twice about setting to in terms of, physical confrontation with either the authorities or, counter demonstrators, usually people of a far-right persuasion who I would have major issue with, and still do. But I was shown a very different path by some key people down through the years, a peaceful path, persistently peaceful path, the art of making your point in such a way as you don't undermine someone else's world, and can create space, about creating space for dialogue, space for creativity, space for things to happen that you can't predict. But what you can predict is that by creating that space, it's unlikely the outcome will be an aggressive or violent one. But I think one of the stories I do really like quoting is many, many years ago, in the sort of mid to late 80s, I was working on the refurbishment of Hampstead Tube Station in London as a labourer. And we were tasked, Hampstead Tube Station is one of the deepest tube stations in London. I think Goodge Street is the only one that's deeper. So we were working in these tunnels that hadn't been touched since the 1940s and had all these amazing, incredible, ancient advertising all over. It was like being stuck in some sort of time machine. And then we were tasked with, there was a wall that we'd come across which was not deep in the tunnels, it was up near the ticket hall, tasked with knocking out this wall. And behind the wall was an original Victorian, Hampstead tube station is very small. It was a small Victorian ticket space. And, beautiful tile work, wrought iron, all of that sort of stuff. So we went to our ganger, our foreman, and said to him, this is, you sure you want us, what should we do here? And he said, oh, just smash it out, get on with it. And we were like, the oldest of us was 21. The majority of us were sort of 18. I was 18. And it's like 18, I might have been 17 actually, it wasn't my first year. Anyway, 18, 19. And so we had a quick meeting, and the eldest of us, who was like, as I said, was 21. We decided we were going to ring London Transport, the museum, and say to them, look, we've got a big task with smashing out this ticket hall. We don't think it should be, we should. And they said, oh, well, don't worry, I'll be down in a few days and we'll probably put an order on it. And we said, that can't happen. If we don't do this, we'll get fired. So you got to get down here quick. We explained a bit more detail, and they said, we'll be there within the hour. So they were there within the hour and basically slapped an order on this thing. And we were then tasked not with smashing it out, but with cutting it out carefully. And we took it on flatbed sort of wheeled pallet trucks down to a lorry, and it was taken to the London Transport Museum, and it was established in there. So that was a decision. Young people are often portrayed as being incapable of doing the right thing or making an informed judgment or the right judgment in pressured situations, and which I find patently ridiculous, because that example there tells you that young people are capable of making the right decision. It's often young people who do the fighting and dying in conflict. It's often young people who, have to endure really difficult socioeconomic circumstances. It's always young people who are the first to be exploited. And if they're additionally poor or disadvantaged in some way, then doubly and trebly so. So, yes, they can make the right choice, and they can make good decisions. And that's why at the Warren, they lead on everything we do. That's why it's governed by the Warren, because we have faith. Now, not that sometimes they do require support in doing so, but we have faith that, equipped with the right tools, young people and people generally, when presented with an opportunity to do the right thing, will choose to do so.
Absolutely. It's a great example. It's great to hear that part of your life experience. Yeah, thank you.
I remember it well.
That. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with me, man. Well, I'm just going to squeeze a couple more in, just because that's an amazing story. And I think that you've obviously changed and developed so much as a person. Obviously, people in the Warren see you a certain way, and you're known in Hull a certain way, and people can see that you've done a TED Talk and done all these wonderful things about your life, in community work and the Warren. But, from the very first kind of, from your earliest days, how have you changed and developed? What have you learned about yourself? Not only through the work that you've done at the Warren, but the work previous to that. How have you changed and developed and grown as a person?
Primarily the first thing is that I've become less aggressive over the years. I've learned how to channel it. I would like to think I have a greater appreciation of my privilege, both as somebody who has been fortunate to get to do what they wanted to do, both in terms of media, first off. I suppose originally I wanted to be a writer, but that's all journalists are like that. You might even admit to that, Dom. But I think and that, having been aware of that sense of privilege, allows you to see the reality of other people's lives and have a greater appreciation for. My dog's just walked in.
Yeah, it's great. I love it.
He's just been washed, and which means he'll be scratching around the house for another 2 hours at least.
That's great. It's great. All interviews have pets in.
Yeah, good. But yeah, I mean, you have a greater understanding of other people's circumstances, and then
Mm,
that, it means you're less closed in your thinking, I
mm,
think. And again, that to to be that way is also a privilege, because it's not easy for a lot of people to open up to other views, because they, you know, quite understandably are restricted often to the level of perception they might have of the world by their own circumstance, which will be pressured, particularly if you're not well off. If the
mhm.
focus is, if there's a pressured focus to keep food on the table and clothes on backs and roofs over heads, and and that pressure is intense, it's hard to have room to think about how others are seeing the world.
Absolutely. And I guess I think that's the thing. I really picked up on you saying, how you've changed with your aggression and stuff, and how you've been able to sort of channel that. And that's quite a great bit of self-reflection there. You must feel really good about that kind of that personal development that you've gone through, because it can be quite difficult to make those changes.
It can, yeah. I do feel, I do, when I reflect on it, I do feel good. But I was also, it wasn't something, this is the thing, it wasn't something that I did,
Mm,
It was other people,
mm,
and it was, it was, like, as a very young person in my teens in north side of Dublin back in, the early 80s, when tensions between Ireland and Britain were very high, and because of the troubles in Ulster, I and most people around me didn't have a very, very, very either balanced or favourable view of
oh,
the British.
yeah.
And then I moved to London, and I meet these people who, don't have tails and horns. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and are just like me, and circumstances just like me, same tribe, different accent. And I met a lot of very interesting people. And irony of ironies, far from being, the devils that I might have thought they were when I was like 13 or 14 and the hunger strikes were on. I was encountering people who were kind and fair and balanced, and were willing to invest their time in me. We either as friends, or as, you know, uh, a couple of people I could mention from what was then the London College of Printing. It's now called the London University of the Arts, which is very grand.
It is.
There's an amalgamation of the London College of Printing, St. Martin's School of Art, and one or two others. But there was a chap there called Jim McGrain, who was a Scottish lecturer. He used to lecture on what they called contemporary affairs at the time. Sadly, I understand he's no longer with us, but he was very influential, very calming influence. And I suspect was probably a man himself. He's quite a tough character.
Mm,
I suspect he might saw a little bit of himself in me. I think most of us do when we're working with younger
mm,
people. And he was very influential. And then there were, outstanding kindnesses which always stuck with me and influenced me greatly, and that calmed me down and so it is my own personal story, is again proof of the fact that if young people are treated with a degree of kindness and patience and care and attention, however fleetingly, that
mm,
it does register, and it
mm.
can have an impact,
Absolutely, absolutely. Two more questions then, because I think it's really, really cool to sort of get to know you in this way. Going back to the success thing, one thing that people sort of shy away from is, I find that people compare themselves to others, and we get a lot of young people that say, oh, for example, they'll be like, oh, JJ's, at the helm of the Warren, JJ's done all this amazing stuff for people. I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to be that person, and they compare themselves. And I wanted to know if you've ever done that, and how have you overcome that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think everybody's definitely done that at
Mm,
some stage, unless they've been, just been blessed with uber confidence. I mean, I have, on numerous occasions. I mean, I lived in a squat in London for a few years. And, you know, I worked on, I remember, I quote often my boys, my two sons are probably sick and tired of hearing me quote the standing in the driving rain and mud on a West London building site with a 9-inch concrete block on the shoulder of me 11-stone frame, and thinking, how did it come to this? You know, and how am I ever going to get out of this? And it just persistence. And again, some lucky breaks, you know, and that lucky break can be anything, you know. I mean, I used to stand in the car park of a pub called The Crown on Cricklewood Broadway in North London every morning from about 5:30 to 6 to be picked out of a crowd, in the same way as you would see Mexican field workers now picked out, jump in the back of a van. And a break at that stage was getting the opportunity to sit in the cab where there's a heater rather than the back of the van where it'd be freezing cold, you know. So it's seizing on those little tiny good luck triumphs that make you think the next one might be better and bigger and only just around the corner. So, but again, really, you know, in no shape or form did I overcome those things by myself. And that's what's often left out of the narrative. You always hear about somebody saying, oh, well, my great Auntie Mabel, she struggled through it and she achieved X, Y, and Z. Why can't other people do the same? But what's left out of that narrative is Auntie Mabel's neighbours, Auntie Mabel's family, Auntie Mabel's friends, Auntie Mabel's colleagues at work. You know, Auntie Mabel's community is always left out of that narrative because it's easier and simpler to portray it as the triumph of just one person. And sometimes it is just one person, which makes it all the more impressive, but rarely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's nice to sort of focus on that and say, you know, it's a group effort. And I think that's one thing that comes across to me when I enter into the Warren, is there are you guys at the you know, organising it, doing the admin, but a lot of the time it's the young people that make that place tick. It's the young people that make you feel welcome when you walk in as an outsider, and you feel you must. What do you feel now when you walk into the Warren versus when you first walked in? Obviously, you know, that's changed and developed so much over the 6 years plus that you've been involved with the organisation. How has that kind of changed and developed for you and your understanding of the Warren?
I don't remember exactly what I thought of the Warren when I first arrived. I could be pretty certain that I would have had set ideas as to what was possible or achievable, and I can say hand on heart that I was very swiftly disabused of those notions, you know, by young people principally, because although I thought I understood what a youth-led organization would be about, I didn't really, and not in the true sense of understanding young people. I arrived with certain ideas. I arrived with some preconceived notions about young people, sometimes perhaps, and then yeah, and that's a really important thing, because there are people who come to the Warren now, visitors, you know, adult visitors, people in positions of power, whether they be, you know, a potential funder or a contract manager or somebody looking to an academic or, you know, somebody from the police or the authorities. And I sometimes can spot in them, you know, a little bit of how I thought when I first came to the Warren, where you arrive with the best of intentions, but when presented with the reality of somebody's really quite chaotic life, like a young person's life, a particularly marginalized young person, it's quite a shock. And I am able to, and that shock can turn people away. They will arrive with the best intention, but it can frighten them into thinking, I can't deal with this. Can you bring me somebody a little less vulnerable? And that helps me almost have a solidarity with that visitor to say, look, I can see if they say something, I can say things like, yeah, I know exactly. I thought exactly that when I came here. But let me tell you how I arrived at the position or the mode of thinking that I have now about that same issue, and how I got there. And that you're demonstrating solidarity and you're inviting them to think a bit differently at the same time. And I think that's, again, an empathetic human thing that's really important, you know. Now, obviously, there are some things that I couldn't possibly fully understand, and nor would I dare to try, you know, I'm not a person of color. I'm not somebody who has struggled significantly with mental health. I'm not somebody who is, you know, a member of the LGBT community. So I can't ever really appreciate what it's like, but I can do something to assist those young people in changing perceptions by creating this with my colleagues who are, you know, most of whom are far more skilled than me at the muck and bullets of what we have to do at the Warren. Mine's more of a strategic overview and trying to, I mean, I'm learning all the time, all of the time, and it'll never stop. That's probably the one thing I'll regret when I retire. I know that my learning curve is going to plateau very suddenly, you know, unless I find something else to pique my interest.
Yeah. I mean, that moves on nicely to my last real question is because obviously success and happiness, you mentioned very succinctly, you know, that not always intertwined. They can be quite separate things. But I think it's important to kind of get a sense of, you know, given that you work so hard all the time, what things make you happy in your life? What things? Obviously, we talked about things that drive you in a professional sense, but like, what about personally? What things? You know, you've got a wonderful dog there, but what things do you love? What things make you really happy?
Well, my family, obviously, although, you know, anybody in a family will also say they can be the most infuriating thing in your life, and I could be the most infuriating thing in their life, you know, so it works both ways. But I suppose I really couldn't live without music. And I certainly couldn't live without. I mean, I'm sustained by some of my heroes over the years. You know what I mean? The things they say and the things they do. But then you find new heroes all the time. I've got a new hero as of yesterday, who's an Aussie rules footballer.
Oh wow!
Called Adam Goods.
Okay.
And I strongly recommend you watch a documentary called The Australian Dream, which is about, he's from of Aboriginal descent, and it's how he combated racism. He went from being a kid that just wanted to play Aussie rules football, the rules of which I don't understand, to being somebody who ended up becoming a leader of an entire nation, the Aboriginal nation, who were made up of a lot of different tribes. And, you know, so you can have that's what's the excitement of finding new things, new heroes, new ways of working, new inspiration.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Very, very succinct and very cool. Thank you so much. Last question before we finish. Obviously, we are in a lockdown still. We're approaching September. There's a lot of changes coming up. What have you got to tell people that are fans of the Warren, that promote the work of the Warren, and obviously support you as well? Have you got anything to plug? I know there's a couple of new developments in the Warren.
We have a new digital hub. We have a new food hub. We've made the building, we believe, as safe and as open as possible. We've taken lots of precautions to keep young people safe and staff. We're taking temperatures, you know, phased one-way systems throughout the building, lots of sanitizer, lots of partitioning, you know, which we live in hope is going to be temporary. But we've made that partitioning really cool. We've built a lot of sort of individual pods that can accommodate up to 6 people, depending on social distancing measures being relaxed. But, you know, obviously can easily accommodate fewer, of course, you know, like 4, 2, all of which are equipped with iPads and access to internet, and new food hub where we're teaching young people how to cook and cook for each other. So there's lots of really cool stuff there. We're looking at developing a new housing division to what we do too. So providing accommodation, but it's going to be very different because it will be a youth-led housing cooperative.
Wow.
That,
Awesome.
you know, it is a big undertaking, but a really exciting piece of work. Yeah. So we
Fantastic.
hope to have some announcements about that pretty soon. But the digital hub and the food hub are definitely happening.
Brilliant. And awesome. And everybody can find out about the Warren on Facebook. You've got Twitter, Instagram, the Warren Youth Project, if you want to keep tabs on that.
The Warren YP or the Warren Youth Project. Yep.
Fantastic.
Yeah, you can keep up to speed with all of that through all the usual channels. Yeah. The warren.org is our website. But yeah, you'll find us on Facebook, YouTube channels, Instagram, and all the things that I have no idea how they work. There are people, far more skilled people than me at the Warren, and look after all that.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, they're all amazing, and I can't wait to come back in. It's been a pleasure having time with you, JJ, and your dog as well. Thank you so much for spending the time with me, mate. I appreciate it.